Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Microsoft has unveiled a new Zero Trust DNS. Also, an important Lockbit ransomware gang member has been identified by the authorities. And some organizations may be at risk of a recent Windows update that's in preview bricking their machines. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And also brought to you by ControlUp, end-to-end digital experience management for the work-from-anywhere era. ControlUp, happy users, happy IT. And of course, also brought to you by Networks Policy Pack, where you use Group Policy, Policy Pack Cloud, or MDM, to remove local admin rights, manage and lock down applications, Java, browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Unfortunately, bad news relating to recent Windows updates is coming in hot and heavy. The Register reports installing update KB5036909 on domain controllers is causing NTLM traffic to suddenly spike for some customers. According to Microsoft's Release Health Dashboard, this issue is likely to affect organizations that have a very small percentage of primary domain controllers in their environment and high NTLM traffic. Microsoft said it is working on a resolution and will provide an update in an upcoming release, and for now, the only recourse is to remove the update, which is obviously far from ideal. So if you do encounter a spike in traffic on your primary domain controllers, you may need to remove this update if it's causing you hassle. An AskWoody.com forum user warned that they encountered an issue with recent Windows updates in a third-party service called Manage Engine. And the only place I recognize Manage Engine from is actually on bleepingcomputer.com's website. I always get these pop-up ads from Manage Engine. So you may be familiar with this if you visited that website, or if you definitely use this in your environment, this is a story you need to hear. It seems Manage Engine is a unique factor here for this user on the forum, as disabling it apparently prevents the problem. What is the problem, you ask? Well, it's pretty bad. Affected machines blue screen and then boot into the Windows recovery environment after a reboot, and safe mode is not possible. It also appears that the Windows installation itself is not accessible, and dump logs were no help, as it won't even create a crash dump log. When trying to uninstall updates, there's an error that ran into some problems trying to uninstall. The culprit patch is KB5036979, which is a preview update. So this one should hopefully not affect production enterprise customers, since they won't be deploying a preview update. Also, it looks like it should only affect those who also have Manage Engine in their environment. So hopefully this brave soul who ran into the problem will work with Microsoft to get it fixed before the patch makes it to prime time, to spare any Manage Engine customers from potential bricking of machines. Late last week, Microsoft unveiled ZTDNS, which is a framework that aims to sort out the domain name system or DNS mess so that it's better locked down inside Windows networks. The ZT in ZTDNS stands for Zero Trust. Reportedly, its two main features are encrypted and cryptographically authenticated connections between end-user clients and DNS servers, and the ability for administrators to tightly restrict the domains these servers will resolve. Ars Technica described the solution as integrating the Windows DNS engine with the Windows filtering platform, the core component of the Windows firewall, directly into client devices. Jake Williams, who is VP of Research and Development at consultancy Hunter Strategy, and who's also a really good follow on social media, said the union of these previously disparate engines would allow updates to be made to the Windows firewall on a per domain name basis. The result, he said, is a mechanism that allows organizations to, in essence, tell clients only use our DNS server that uses TLS and will only resolve certain domains. Microsoft calls this DNS server or servers the protective DNS server. By default, the firewall will deny resolutions to all domains except those enumerated in allow lists. A separate allow list will contain IP address subnets that clients need to run authorized software. Security expert Royce Williams called this a, quote, sort of bidirectional API for the firewall layer, so you can both trigger firewall actions and trigger external actions based on firewall state. So instead of having to reinvent the firewall wheel, if you are an AV vendor or whatever, you just hook into WFP, end quote, which is that Windows filtering platform. There is an air of caution as administrators must make significant changes to their current designs or risk self-inflicted denial of service. Microsoft published a separate post detailing some of the processes that will be complicated by the implementation of Zero Trust DNS and others that will bypass it. ZTDNS is entering its private preview, and Microsoft did not say when insiders might be able to review it or when it might become generally available. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. I'm sure I will do a follow-up story once it becomes available in preview. BleepyComputer.com reports that Microsoft is testing the display of memory speeds in Windows 11 Task Manager as MTS, or mega transfers per second, rather than the traditional megahertz. Users of the beta builds may notice that this is rolling out now. As new technologies have allowed DDR memory to increase the data transfer rate without increasing clock speed or megahertz, it makes the old way of measuring memory less accurate than it previously was. And since then, companies and operating systems have migrated to a performance metric called megatransfers per second, or MTSS. This is the number of data transfers in millions per second, thus the need for this change. According to a report by BleepyComputer.com, Google is set to introduce a feature in Google Chrome version 126 that will provide web developers the ability to present chapters on embedded videos within websites, similar to the chapters feature found on some YouTube videos. For an example of what the embedded code for one of these embedded videos will look like, you can check out the video of this episode, which is episode 333, and you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com, or you could just go to the link for this article that I'm referencing, which is also at 5bytespodcast.com. Just FYI, Chrome 124 was recently released, so it may be a few weeks until version 126 gets pushed to the stable channel. NeoWin.net and DeskModder has reported that the next major Windows 11 version 24H2, also called the 2024 update, may enable Bitlocker by default during installation, and this may seemingly be happening across multiple editions of Windows 11, including the Home Edition. If you are concerned about performance issues relating to this change and having that encryption enforced, or you have any other worries about simply just encrypting the disk, there appears to still be an option available to disable device encryption inside the privacy and security settings within the Windows 11 menus. It'll be interesting to see if this does, in fact, make it to the production release of this update. It might, because enhancing security by default seems to be the way to go, and probably is a smart way to go. On World Password Day, Microsoft announced support for Passkeys for Microsoft consumer accounts, allowing users to authenticate using passwordless methods such as Windows Hello, FIDO2 security keys, biometric data such as facial scans or fingerprints, or device pins. Bleepy Computer warns that Microsoft syncs your passkeys with your other devices rather than only storing distinct passkeys on each device. And this is not the most secure method, as if an attacker gains access to your account, the passkeys would then be synced to their device. Microsoft says it's doing this for reasons of convenience, allowing people to maintain access to their accounts when upgrading or losing their devices. If you would like to try out the passkeys on your Microsoft consumer accounts yourself, there is instructions provided by bleepycomputer.com in the article, and I'll share that with this episode, which again is episode 333, and you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com. Gartner have published a Magic Quadrant for Cloud AI developer services, and it's pretty interesting. They put Microsoft as the clear leader, followed by Google, then AWS, and then followed by IBM, with OpenAI put in the Visionaries Quadrant. They made some pretty valid points about OpenAI and their lack of adequate customer support, in my opinion. Now remember, this is AI developer services, not just overall generative AI that's represented in this quadrant. I guess in that context, this Magic Quadrant does make some sense, but it does feel a little odd that OpenAI would be put in a completely different section, particularly when Microsoft is so reliant on OpenAI for its current services. But that's just my opinion. According to a report by Ars Technica, Microsoft is working on a new large-scale AI language model called MAI-1, which could potentially rival state-of-the-art models from Google, Anthropic, and OpenAI, according to a report also published by The Information. This marks the first time Microsoft has developed an in-house AI model of this magnitude since investing over $10 billion in OpenAI for the rights to reuse the startup's AI models. To train the model, Microsoft has been allocating a large cluster of servers with NVIDIA GPUs and compiling training data from various sources, including text generated by OpenAI's GPT-4 and public internet data. Microsoft may apparently preview MAI-1 as early as its Build Developer Conference later this month, as reported by one source cited by The Information. Now, if MAI-1 was to have been public last year, that would make a lot more sense in the context of why Microsoft would be such a clear leader, in my opinion, in the Magic Quadrant. But the assessment was done last year, not this year, or not in the context of this future development, obviously. This is also an interesting development, as previously Satya Nadella had indicated that, if the OpenAI relationship were to ever become severed, Microsoft itself would be able to stand alone with their own AI offering. So it surely seems like they're trying to shore up their AI initiatives. The worst kept secret in the industry is a secret no more. It has been announced that henceforth, VMware EUC will be known as Omnissa. So apparently it's not Omnissa like I've been saying, or at least I said in the last episode, or the one before that even. According to the announcement, it's pronounced phonetically AHM-NISS-UH with an emphasis on the nis. So Omnissa. And apparently the name is inspired by a vision of empowerment. It draws from a blend of ideas that suggest the comprehensive nature of the platform's capabilities and usefulness, and it conveys a sense of working calmly with all the knowledge and insight you need, no matter what you're doing or where you are, according to the press release or the announcement. In the actual announcement, they put in a word cloud, which for the life of me, I don't understand how the words in the word cloud led them to this name, but sure, look at. Also, in regards to the recent change, Duncan Epping shared that VMware-related software can now be found under the download site within the VMware Cloud Foundation section. So if you're used to, the old VMware site and going to your downloads and being able to sort by the different products, well, now you'll have to go to VMware Cloud Foundation to get the actual VMware products when you're a Broadcom customer. And also more specifically to the Omnissa change, Aaron Parker has given a heads up to those of us who use Evergreen that the change has resulted in some VMware applications breaking in Evergreen. So not surprising, they've rebranded, they've moved some of the applications for the EUC clients, so Evergreen just needed to be updated. In a follow-up to a previously reported story, the Lockbit ransomware group's leak site that was seized by law enforcement had some updates recently. There was an announcement. Our blog post kind of looked like a blog post, at least from the screenshot on the bleepingcomputer.com article, titled, "Who is Lockbit Sup?" And the post said, "We know who he is, we know where he lives, we know how much he is worth. Lockbit Sup has engaged with law enforcement," with a smiley face emoji. And the post also had a countdown timer on it, with like a countdown timer that was set to like 1 day and a few hours, I believe, at the time. Well, the FBI, the UK National Crime Agency, and Europol have unveiled sweeping indictments and sanctions against the administrator of the Lockbit ransomware operation, with the identity of the Russian threat actor revealed for the first time. According to a new indictment by the US Department of Justice and a press release by the NCA, the Lockbit ransomware operator known as Lockbit Sup, and also known as Putin Crab, has been confirmed to be a Russian national named Dmitry Yuryevich Koroshev. who's 31 years old and who reportedly earned $100 million as part of the gang's activities. Authorities have moved to freeze assets and all of that normal jazz, and it would be very interesting, though, to hear how they managed to tie this back to a single individual. Impressive work by the authorities, and hopefully this leads to less activity or a complete seizure or a complete stop to the Lockbit ransomware. Researchers from Leviathan Security have published information on a novel attack that they reckon could be used against any and all VPN applications. The attack essentially cloaks the user session and routes through an attacker directly. The attacker can read, drop, or modify the leaked traffic, and the victim maintains their connection to both the VPN and the internet. The attack has been called TunnelVision and is believed to have already been used by cyber gangs and has been a vulnerability for over 20 years. Ars Technica reports the attack works by manipulating the DHCP server that allocates IP addresses to devices trying to connect to a local network. A setting known as option 121 allows the DHCP server to override default routing rules that sends VPN traffic through a local IP address that initiates the encrypted tunnel. By using option 121 to route VPN traffic through the DHCP server, the attack diverts the data to the DHCP server itself. Android users are reportedly safe from this particular attack, and for others, the most effective fixes are to run the VPN inside of a virtual machine whose network adapter is not in bridged mode, or connect to the VPN to the internet through the Wi-Fi network of a cellular device. So I'm sure this one's a story that's going to have legs for some time, as VPNs are pretty widely used. Recently, Microsoft announced a series of plans and changes to its security practices, including a few changes that have already been made, like enforcing multi-factor authentication, implementing least privilege management across the board. But the most interesting of all these changes to me is the fact that senior leadership teams' pay will reportedly at least partially be dependent on whether the company is meeting their security plans and milestones. And this is according to a report by Ars Technica. Microsoft did not specify how much of an executive's pay would be dependent on meeting those security goals, but the fact that any part of their pay is dependent is really, really interesting to me. And it's probably a good idea. I mean, these major organizations that have so many customers relying on them must be doing all possible to ensure the integrity and security of their customers and the customer data. And obviously, this plan and these changes come off the back of what's been a pretty rough, really 18 months to 2 years for Microsoft, as they've been breached on numerous occasions. And a few quick hit stories to wrap up the news for this week. The awesome Eric from ZenappBlog.com highlighted a reminder that the Microsoft Intune PowerShell application ID based authentication method has been removed by Microsoft. And based on some of the recent comments on the Intune Win32 app GitHub repository's issues list, it appears this has been causing problems for some, with the connect-ms Intune graph commandlet failing. I did not see a response from Microsoft at the time of this recording on those issues, so it's probably one to keep an eye on if you're an Intune customer or Intune user. OpenAI has reportedly signed a licensing deal with London's Financial Times. This is in addition to other previous partnerships and licensing agreements with the likes of the Associated Press and Le Monde. So obviously, if you're following the podcast, you would have heard about the New York Times case that's going on, where the New York Times had some evidence that showed that some OpenAI results was almost verbatim in the entirety of articles from New York Times. So it makes sense if they're pretty much lifting entire articles from news sources that they sign these license agreements and partnerships rather than risk the possibility of lawsuits. The end of support for the Classic Teams client starts on July 1st, 2024, so only a few weeks away. So that's the end of support, but the end of availability for the Classic Teams client starts July 1st, 2025. Congrats to Aaron Parker. Evergreen has now surpassed 3 million installs in the PowerShell gallery. Well deserved and awesome. And finally, for the news this week, just a friendly reminder to all listening, please take some time to fill out the DaaS Like a Pro survey. This is a really useful resource for everyone in the community. It gives an idea of just the trends in the industry. Are you possibly using I don't know, a VDI solution today and planning on adapting DaaS in the future? What do you use for managing your profiles, deploying your applications, and so forth? Having that information and just being able to see the trends over the last few years is going to be really useful for everyone. Well, that's it for this episode's news. Now on to the scripts, tricks, and tips. First up this week, just to promote something of my own, I took the rare opportunity to actually post a blog on my personal site, rorymod.com, where I gave an updated review of the EUC Unplugged conference, since it was just a couple weeks ago and I did attend. So if you're in this space and you haven't attended this conference, or maybe you're just recognizing the kind of gulf in user groups and different events just because of changes since the pandemic, this might be of interest to you to just kind of read up on what this conference is all about. It is certainly unique. Next, Hank Pole shared a PowerShell commandlet to disable Bing search, which helps improve start menu performance in Windows. So I'm not going to read out what the PowerShell commandlet is, but I'll share it with this episode. And this is one that's pretty easy and seems like a pretty quick win for anyone on their own personal device to just disable this and get better performance. Marcus Zelln shared tips for fixing Teams 2.x issues at E2EVC, where Teams will not start after the first launch and subsequent launches. And he also provided a registry value for disabling the Teams auto updates. So if you work with Teams, these 2 tips may be of use to you. Sander Rosemuller, who I believe listens to the podcast because he previously won one of the giveaways, had a blog post on Graph API in automation at scale. So obviously the Graph API has been becoming a necessity for Windows administrators when it comes to automation. So if you want to see an article on how to use Graph API for your automation at scale, this is a great blog post to reference. And for the second time in this episode, I got to mention Eric from zenappblog.com, who last week hosted an AMA, which is an Ask Me Anything, on the Intune subreddit, saying that he's an application expert and you can ask him anything. So there certainly does seem to be a lot of interest around application packaging and deployment again, likely because of the increased demand for deploying application updates. So this is probably going to be a topic that interests several people. So check out the subreddit and the AMA. Over at callforcloud.nl, there's a lot of information on Attestation, which is a feature in Intune that can be used for verifying the trustworthiness of a platform and integrity of binaries running inside of it. Given the focus on security, and also because I was mentioning a few Intune things, I figured this was a good time to bring up this tip, and I'll share a link to that with this episode. And finally, Microsoft published a really interesting article saying that's titled "Our Year with CoPilot: What Microsoft has learned about AI at work." So for insights from Microsoft themselves about developing and growing Copilot, check out this article, which I will link with this episode, which is again episode 333, and you'll find all of the links for everything I covered on this episode at 5bytespodcast.com with this episode. Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you so much for listening.